Hello, my name's Gavin. This is Genre Books, and it's another Thursday bookshelf exploratory. There's a few books to go through this week, so I'll keep the preamble short. Books out of order, books need sorting. I'm going through the books, using the opportunity to show the shelves off before I rearrange everything. So, start with Stephen King, The Dark Tower. Now, I did a few weeks ago the first volume of The Dark Tower, and here's the second in a completely different space. The next is two books by J.T. Edson, who became one of the best-selling Western authors in the UK, despite not being from America. So we have Gunsmoke, Thunder, and The Fastest Gun in Texas. No need to introduce this next one, but there we go. Ian Fleming, first James Bond film, not the first James Bond novel, but this is the 7th printing, and this is the movie tie-in version. So you have Sean and Ursula Andress on the front cover. Sean again with Joseph Wiseman playing Dr. No on the back. A couple of Alan Dean Fosters, and these are Spellsinger books. This is volume 2, The Hour of the Gate, and volume 3, The Day of the Dissonance. I bet I don't have volume 1. A couple of Ace fantasies, and I do worry about comedy books. I will have to give these a go and decide whether to get any more in the series. These are both sequels. I don't think there's going to be much call to have read the first books or the second books in the series. But here is Demon Blues, fantasy comedy with the real world. Unicorn U. This is from 1992, so quite some years before Monsters University, but looks like the same kind of thing, fantasy, varsity, silliness. I'll get back to you on these. I think I'm going to have to be in a very specific mood to want to tackle them. I don't want to prejudge. I have never read Esther Freisner, but I am just... comedy is the most difficult thing to tackle because it is so individual. We'll see. This could be the new Terry Pratchett for me. I don't know. Some fantasy books now. 2 books from Kenneth C. Flint, both of which look to draw upon Irish history and Irish mythology as the centre of the fantasy, specifically Northern Ireland by the looks of it, which will be interesting to see what was being written about that in the mid-80s. I think this first one is the mid-80s. This is The Hound of Culain. And Isle of Destiny, which is late 80s. A brief respite from the fantasy, and Ian Forster, Howard's End. Now, I've not read this one. I've probably read maybe half of Forster, maybe more than half of Forster. But I'm the ones I'm missing are the biggies. So I've not read Room of a View, I've not read Howard's End, and I've not read When Angels Fear to Tread. But I think I read all the rest of the novels and some short stories. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. As I am this next book, because I've only read 2 of her other novels, and that was Middlemarch and Silas Marner. So The Mill on the Floss. A bit of a battered old Penguin classic, but I know that there's going to be some good notes in there. The introduction, which I won't read until after I read the book, and it's by introduction by A.S. Byatt as well. So I really ought to read something like this for Victober, but will mean I don't read anything else, because these, if Middlemarch is anything to go by, it's engrossing, but intricate. You could read this book and nothing else for the entire month and still never run out of things to say, I would speculate. But I will have to get around to it at some point. No, I don't want to say I will have to get. I want to get around to it at some point. It's if someone could create an extra couple of months between October and November, that would be much appreciated. And back to the fantasy straight away. Phyllis Einstein in the Red Lord's Reach. And 2 ace fantasy books. These are again from the late 80s and the mid 90s respectively. These came in a job lot and they're in pretty good nick. I've not heard of the authors, but as late 80s, early 90s or mid 90s, the covers in this era really do take a bit of a tumble. I've not read Teresa Edgerton, and I've not read, obviously then, Child of Saturn from Teresa Edgerton. Raymond E. Feist, who I did read when I was a teenager, has some nice things to say about this book, and this is the book 1 of a trilogy, so I am going to give this a fair shake. I'm going to read it at some point and decide whether it's worth getting the remainder of the series. But the other ace fantasy I've got here is a sequel, so I'm maybe a bit more research, see if it's worth getting the first in this series or whether it's worth maybe not keeping this one. Again, the cover, what is happening in 1995? It just looks all wrong. By contrast, here we go, 1979. That's a fantasy cover. Luminous, a little bit weird, a little bit abstract. Just much more visually striking. But this is more Women of Wonder, so it will be a sequel, I should imagine, to Women of Wonder, but it doesn't matter because it is just a selection of novellas and short stories, edited by Pamela Sargent, and including stories from C.L. Moore, Lee Brackett, Joanna Russ, Josephine Saxton, Kate Wilhelm, Joan D. Vinci, and Ursula K. Le Guin. So these next 3 have been on my shelf for the best part of 30 years. I think I have read the first 2, and I don't think I've read the third. But these are all Ernest Hemingway. So we have Men Without Women, Across the River and Into the Trees, and The Green Hills of Africa. Next up is Hermann Hesse, The Glass Bead Game. Not read this. I've read Steppenwolf from Hermann Hesse years and years ago. Enjoyed it. This is supposed to be the magnum opus, so I will be giving this a go at some point before I die. James P. Hogan, The Two Faces of Tomorrow. This is a Del Rey science fiction from 1979 and probably a fairly early example of worrying about the dangers of AI. So we have a self-aware computer on a space station and some people who are going there to try to turn it off. Pan science fiction and Robert Holdstock, I Among the Blind. This is his first novel. It's nice cover, a little bit faded now, unfortunately, but much more famous, I think, for his book Mythico Wood, which somewhere back here resides. But yeah, his first book. McFadden Bartell paperback from 1971, Dark Planet by J. Hunter Holly. A first edition from 1961, and the Ballantine books, The Lovers by Philip Jose Farmer. non-fiction now, and writers of the 1970s. So a book about Kurt Vonnegut Jr. by Peter J. Reed. So I don't know anything about this series, but it says here that the other books in the series are Herman Hesse, Richard Brautigan, and Tolkien. Remember when I said a few minutes ago that fantasy covers from the late 80s and the early 90s are a little bit sus. Summer King and Winterfall from Lisa Goldstein. What is going on there? I don't want to do them down too much. I probably still prefer this kind of cover to modern book covers and the modern aesthetic, which is so abstracted as to be boringly pastel. At least this is bold and vibrant, but not really the kind of style I like. But I am not letting the cover sway my judgment as to whether I should read it or not. I've not read Lisa Goldstein before, but she is the winner of the American Book Award. I don't know what the American Book Award is. Ace science fiction from the 1950s, and a book that is falling apart. And this is First to the Stars by Rex Gordon. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, translated by Robert Graves and Omar Ali Shah. And the Epic of Gilgamesh from whoever wrote the Epic of Gilgamesh. Avert your eyes, children. It's a cover of a book from Sharon Green. And like the other Sharon Green book I've got, it features a lady wearing not nearly enough to be practical in a barbarian environment. And there she is with her solid gold pasties and little else. Someone obviously liked the cover because there is a piece missing from the first page in the middle. Didn't understand what that meant, why it was missing. And then, I realised that you can send off for a poster of the cover if you just return this slip, which somebody did. Ossian's Ride by Fred Hoyle, the famous astronomer and Cambridge professor. Joseph Green's Gold the Man. Also in Pan, Perry Mason mystery, the Case of the Glamorous Ghost by Stanley Gardner. And more fantasy, this time David Gemmell. So that is Knights of Dark Renown. More Ace fantasy, and this is The Black Jade Road by Catherine Grant, the sequel. Do I have the first book in the series? Probably not. So it's the sequel to The Phoenix Bells, book 2 of The Land of 10,000 Willows. The Iliad. I don't know what I can tell you about this book. Am I just going to have to go on a 90s, late 80s fantasy binge event at some point? Daniel Hood, Wizard's Heir, and Ken Hood, Demon's Sword. William Hallward, Duncton Tales. Now, with these books, all the characters seem to be moles. That's all I know about it. If anyone has read I think it was Duncton. If anyone's read the Duncton Chronicles or this book, then please let me know. I mean, the Times of London, paper of record, says it's more readable and rewarding than The Lord of the Rings. I'm struggling to pass that, but let me know. Mid-90s science fiction now, and Scott G. Gia, Genelin, The Planet's Fall, first time in print. I've not heard of this author before the book was in a job lot. I've retained it and to give it a shot. More Del Rey science fiction, but now a 1983 reprint of a 1977 book. So I'm a little bit heartened by the thought that it was good enough to be reprinted. And that's To Control the Stars by Robert Hoskins. Some old classic-y type horror, and it bought this purely on spec and also because it was 50 pence. It looks very much in the paperback from hell mould. This is David Silver's Come 13. The Silmarillion. A book I've not yet finished. I'm reading this very, very slowly, as if it was the Bible. Which I suppose in some ways it might well be. It's certainly interesting, but yeah, I would suggest it's not something you sit down and read cover to cover in a sitting. There's a lot of information to soak up, and it is making me realise I will definitely have to be rereading Lord of the Rings once I've finished it. Sphere science fiction now, and Alan Dean Foster's To the Vanishing Point. Larry Niven, Rainbow Mars. 1980s fantasy now, and some 1980s fantasy which I actually have read. Got these from the library when I was probably 14, 15. This is Raymond E. Feist. So Magician, so that I think I read this in its 2 volumes before, which is Magician's Apprentice and Magician Master, something like that. And the conclusion to this, the Rift War saga, of Darkness at Sethalon. Now I think Raymond E. Feist is still writing Rift War books, and had I infinite time I would read them. I do not have infinite time. I'm going to wait at least until retirement before I even think about tackling and trying to catch up on the last 40 years of a series. Here's a fantasy anthology which takes as its subject the castle. So it's just a collection of short stories about castles. Edited by John DeChancy. It's got, who's it got in it? It's got Roger Zelazny, Lawrence Watts Evans, Esther Freisner, David Bischoff, Pamela Sargent, Charles de Lint, and others still. More fantasy comedy. Lionel Fenn, The Seven Spears of the Woodchuck, by the author of The Quest for the White Duck. I think this is a comedy. If not, it's unintentionally one. But here we are. Jericho Dove, Hero Extraordinaire, and His Adventure. Again, my worry about comedy fantasies and comedy books is exacerbated by the length of this one. Can a joke be strung out to 375 pages? We'll see. And more 90s fantasy. This is Robert C. Fleet's White Horse Dark Dragon. I actually don't mind this cover so much. I like that idea. That's simple but well done. And a couple of books that I'm going to read in September. By the time this video is due to come out, I will already probably have spoken about them on this channel. And we're back with the comedy again, and Board of the Rings. So the Lord of the Rings parody from the Harvard Lampoon. And yet more comedy. This is No Bed for Bacon by Carol Brahms and S.J. Simon. A bit of a battered old paperback from Sphere Science Fiction, but this is Anne McCaffrey, To Ride Pegasus. Anne McCaffrey, previously, before she was a writer, an opera singer and opera stage director. I don't know how many people know about that one. Also from Sphere Science Fiction, this is Damon Knight's Analog Men. A novel I started for Rocket Summer but didn't get a chance to finish and want to read by the end of this year. That is The Four-Sided Triangle by William F. Temple. The same goes for this book, although this isn't a novel, it's a collection of short stories. I didn't get around to reading all of the short stories in it. This is Before the Golden Age, edited by Isaac Asimov, and including such writers as Captain S.P. Meek, P. Shoyla Miller, Clifford D. Simak, Charles R. Tanner, Jack Williamson, and Neil R. Jones and Edmund Hamilton. A couple of mysteries now. Killer Smile by Steve Hayes and David Whitehead. And although this is in the Mystery Library, I have read about this book, I think, just a couple of nights ago. This is a Foreign Legion book, and I think this is something from the Mushroom Press, but this is a much later reprint. And so this is some members of the Foreign Legion stuck out in the middle of nowhere. Unfortunately, the middle of nowhere is also where someone is conducting a nuclear test. Now, I've been a bit mean about fantasy covers from the late 80s and the mid 90s. I think maybe one of the reasons I sort of picked up on those covers whilst I'm going through this particular shelf is because I'm ending with a series of books. These are books I will never be getting rid of. This is my collection so far, what I have in the Ballantine Adult Fantasy series. Once I have more of these, once I have read a lot more of them, I will do a full set of videos on the Ballantine Adult Fantasy series. That's some way off. I'm going to talk about the books as I do read them. But these are classics of fantasy, or what is perceived as fantasy. Selected by Lynn Carter, who is editing the series. It's a fairly short running series, 3 or 4 years. But they did cram an awful lot in. And you'll see why I rave about the covers. This is in no particular order, but the first one I have is the first book of the official series. And you can tell the official series because they have this unicorn logo. The logo does change, as you'll see, but the white unicorn logo denotes Ballantine Adult Fantasy, and if I see it, I will get it if I don't have it. This is The Blue Star by Fletcher Pratt, which I have read, and that was very fun. So this book is from 1969, and the original of The Blue Star was from 1952. So at this point, it's not sort of classic fantasy, but I think it counts now. Rolf Krake's Saga by Paul Anderson. The Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Edison. So this is Ballantine Fantasy, but this is a book that came before the true adult fantasy series. So no unicorn logo here. 3 from George MacDonald. Lilith. Evanor. And Fantastes. This book. A pair of books I've definitely shown before on this channel. William Morris, The Well at World's End, Volume 1 and Volume 2. The Young Magicians, edited by Lynn Carter. And you'll see that white unicorn logo is now black for some reason. But this anthology contains works from William Morris, Lord Dunsany, E.R. Edison, James Branch Cabell, H.P. Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, Lynn Carter, Abraham Merritt, Robert E. Howard, L. Sprague de Camp, Henry Kuttner, Jack Vance, C.S. Lewis, and Tolkien. So that's a pretty solid roster of writers. Imaginary Worlds from Lynn Carter, which is his history of fantasy. So yeah, that will be worth reading at some point. Discoveries in Fantasy. So another anthology featuring works from Ernest Brammer, Richard Garnett, Donald Corley and Eden Philpotts. Dragons, Elves and Heroes. So another anthology. This has pieces from Beowulf, from the Volsunga saga, written by William Morris, or maybe translated, I don't know. The Mabinogion, Kipling, Puck Song, the Grettir saga from S. Baring Gould, the Poems of Ossian, Mort d'Arthur, Tomo Bedlam Song, the Kiev Cycle, the Kalevala, Mandeville's Travels, part of the Fairy Queen. So yeah, it's a hodgepodge here. It's got some Voltaire in it, some Tennyson, and some Shakespeare, and some Lynn Carter. Golden City's Far, which is another, what I'm going to say anthology. It's a series of excerpts of some, well, spanning millennia, really. It's going from the Book of Thoth right up to what we got here. We're going through the Arabian Nights. We're going through works from Geoffrey of Monmouth, up until pieces from Voltaire and Anatole France. So yep, it covers a lot of ground. Another one of the collections or anthologies, New Worlds for Old. So we have William Beckford, translated by Clark Ashton Smith, Edgar Allan Poe, George MacDonald, Oscar Wilde, Lord Dunsany, H.P. Lovecraft, Gary Myers, George Sterling, C.L. Moore, Robert E. Howard, Mervyn Peake, Lynn Carter, and the two final anthologies I've got in the series, the Great Short Novels of Adult Fantasy 1 and the Great Short Novels of Adult Fantasy 2. In one we have Fletcher Pratt and L. Sprague de Camp, Anatole France, Robert W. Chambers and William Morris. And in volume 2 we have George MacDonald, Robert W. Chambers, Ernest Brammer and Eden Philpotts. We have The Sorcerer's Ship by Hannes Bock, and that white unicorn that went black is now red. The Silver Stallion from James Branch Cabell. And another Cabell, The Cream of the Jest. Khaled by F. Marion Crawford. The World's Desire by H. Rider Haggard and Andrew Lang. Evangeline Walton, The Island of the Mighty. Another Hannes Bock, Beyond the Golden Stair. One which I am toying with for a Victober read, The Lost Continent by C.J. Cutcliffe Hine. At the Edge of the World by Lord Dunsany. And Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, Volume 1, translated by Richard Hodgins. There was, unfortunately, no Volume 2 forthcoming. But that's it. And although I still have a huge amount of shelves to go through, I don't think the covers are going to get any better than that, I'm afraid. So you may as well switch off now. Until next time.